Welcome to Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast. Learn firsthand from business owners who've built successful ABA businesses. Utilize proven techniques and strategies to help your practice thrive. This is Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast with Jonathan Mueller.
My name is Jonathan Mueller. I'm the host of Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast. And I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Breanne Hartley to the pod today. Dr. Hartley is a BCBAD with 20 years of experience working with patients on the autism spectrum and their families. She's currently the Chief Clinical Officer of Little Star ABA Therapy. And she speaks nationally on topics highlighting ways in which BCBAs can effectively structure clinical work in practical settings. And she co-authored a book, The Training Curriculum for Supervisors of ABA Technicians in Autism Programs. She's a board member of the Behavior Analyst Certification Board and a committee member for the Autism Commission on Quality. Breanne, welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Yeah, I really appreciate you inviting me to come chat with you today.
I am thrilled that we get a chance to chat. And we first officially met at the CASP conference some months ago in Portland. And, I have a confession to make. So I was doing a presentation and I saw you in the audience and I was like, oh my gosh, that's Dr. Breanne Hartley. And I got like this total, I was like, I don't know if I would say intimidated, but just like so excited, like to be able to see that we were going to connect. And you ended up having a presentation after, and then, one thing led to another, we got to catch up, and I'm psyched that you're in my orbit.
Oh, I completely agree. I was just so excited to see that, of course, you were presenting at the conference, that I could jump into the presentation that you were doing, which was amazing. And I was just bummed I had to sneak out at the very end so that I could get to a presentation that I was doing. But I wanted to give you all sorts of accolades at the end to let you know how much I enjoyed your content. But like you said, we were able to kind of catch up, at least wait.
Right on. And the topic of your presentation, I absolutely want to get to in a little bit. But
Sure.
first, tell me about your Little Star journey. And most importantly, what have you learned along the way?
Yes. Well, my Little Star journey started a little over 7.5 years ago. So I joined the organization in 2015. So Little Star is a ABA provider primarily in the state of Indiana, now northern Kentucky. And really, my entire professional career post-graduate school has been in the state of Kentucky. And so what brought me to Little Star is that I came to the state of Indiana to be a clinical director for an organization called the Verbal Behavior Center for Autism. That was a nonprofit organization. Little Star is a nonprofit organization. Little Star is a much larger nonprofit organization than the Verbal Behavior Center was. And so essentially, after I spent about 7 years at the Verbal Behavior Center, that organization folded into Little Star's services, really kind of taking two nonprofit entities providing very similar services in the same area, Indianapolis, Indiana, and really kind of combining the resources and our abilities to provide services, not only in the Indianapolis area, but then beyond that, across the state of Indiana and beyond. So I was really fortunate back in 2015 to be a part of Little Star, which was pretty mature at that time. It had been established since 2002, so it was 13 years old at the time. And so I felt really privileged to join both myself, my colleagues from the Verbal Behavior Center, and the patients that we were providing services to. I really felt privileged to join this mature organization and really help it continue to grow, continue to expand, continue to evolve the services that we were providing. And so, a lot of really amazing and fantastic learning opportunities in my time thus far within the organization. And I would say, really, at this point, my most significant takeaways or learning opportunities within my role, specifically in the chief clinical officer role, is just how crucial systems are. The development of really well-defined systems to guide teams as organizations grow in the scope of services, in the location of services, as teams get bigger and more diverse, maybe not just having behavior analysts, but also including administrative support teams, for example. Really, the establishment of systems and looking at organizational behavior is just so crucial. And I reflect often on the way in which I was very naive, I guess, as a graduate student, because I had the privilege to get my graduate degree from Western Michigan University, and I learned from some of the greats in our field and had the opportunity to take several systems analysis courses, organizational behavior management courses. And why I say I was naive at the time is that I enjoyed the content, enjoyed those courses, but I was thinking to myself, like, I'm never gonna use this. Like, isn't this cute, that we, have these classes on top of the clinical courses associated to directly working with, individuals with autism and developmental disabilities. And lo and behold, those are courses that are really the foundation of a lot of the work that I do day in and day out to support the clinical services, to support my team members within the clinical department. And so, yeah, those systems analysis courses, taught by, I know John Austin was a member, a podcast guest recently, had the opportunity to learn from him, from Alice Dickinson, from Eric Fox. I mean, really fantastic people that I, again, just draw on that knowledge every day. And those have been my learning opportunities: systems analysis, the development of systems, and then really broadly, like, don't ever take knowledge that's coming to you for granted or assume that you're never going to use it, because like you will use it at some point. So keep your eyes and ears open and be very attuned to new information that's coming your way.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great life lesson, right? Like store that. I call it my mind palace, taking the page from the Sherlock Holmes stuff, the BBC series. But yeah, exactly. Like you never know when that knowledge is going to be needed. What's so interesting, Brian, to me about what you're describing. So I had that same view as like earlier in my career. And I think there's this sense with entrepreneurs, right? And with those that start an organization, you can just like brute force, right? To grow an organization and to do what you need to do to shape it. And the reality is, yes, you can do that, but only up to a certain point. And the point at which you can't, as an owner, or a chief clinical officer, like touch everyone, every team member, touch every family, then you're only as good as your weakest systems. And now I see this all the time in our field as well. But have you found that it's hard? What does it take to really instill in a culture of an organization, this idea, like this leaning into systems? Because it doesn't come naturally, to your point.
Right, right. Well, and yeah, it's really a lot of culture building and value building around the need for systems, having a process, having standard operating procedures, and making sure that we know what those standard operating procedures are. We know where to get them. We know how to communicate with one another if and when they need to be updated. And I think just one of the interesting things in working with clinicians, with BCBAs, is that we're trained to think very individually about the services that we provide to each individual patient that we have the opportunity to provide services to. And that's so important. Absolutely, there are individual nuances and whatnot, but kind of having a framework and groundwork and having really consistent strategies for the way in which we put our work in place. Can we create templates for ourselves so that we're not literally recreating the wheel every time? Can we start beyond the ground zero, so to speak? And so really helping to instill that value within the group of BCBAs that I have the honor of supervising and leading, and really helping clinical folks have an understanding of what are you uniquely qualified to do and where does your skill set come in that these templates, the standardization, these systems building it helps you as a clinician really utilize your skill set to the best of your ability. You don't need to be bothered by some of the minutia or laying the groundwork. You can just jump right in with using your clinical skill set and knowledge that you have spent a lot of time honing. So that's really a lot of what I talk to my team about very frequently and for very long periods of time. That's been another learning opportunity in my role, just professionally, but certainly also with Little Star, is that you certainly as a leader can't expect to say something once and have it stick and have it land. It's continual communication, talking about it differently in different formats, individually and in groups, and from having people giving folks the opportunity for question and answer, like, let me unpack this, let me give you some of my kind of individual examples. So it's really that communication, very widespread, is another learning opportunity. I could just continue to unpack that. Gosh, so many learning opportunities, right? When we really stop to reflect on it.
So true. I've said so many times the addendum to my job title as a co-CEO is chief reminding officer, and I think that's true for any leader. Number one, most verbal communication was like 80-90% ends up not landing, right?
Yeah.
And number two, we have to be able to communicate in ways that our teams will understand. So doing that consistently and in a variety of different formats, from emails to verbal to whatever, sending selfie videos, like so important to reinforcing those values. And that's only this idea of building a culture around commitment to systems in many ways is a change management initiative. And I know you did a presentation at CASP on change management, which unfortunately I wasn't able to be there, but tell me a little more, Breanne, about what's one of the hardest changes you've had to lead your organization through and what'd you learn from that experience?
It's really over the last couple of years, the theme of instilling a change management philosophy within the organization has just been so important to me because we have to be able to be flexible, pivot in a way that's structured in some capacity. And so, an example that I could give as far as a change that we've instilled within Little Star over the last several years has been how we think about and define a caseload for BCBAs. So, in the past, several years ago, we would think about caseloads as the number of individuals that a BCBA is providing services to. So, whether it be 5, 8, 10, 12, okay, that's the caseload. We're going to identify, let's say, for example, 10 patients is what a caseload for our BCBAs is. And what we identified is that, well, there's a lot of variability in 10 different individuals that we provide services to in terms of the profile of that individual as a patient, the intensity of services that they're receiving, the maybe challenging behavior that they demonstrate and whatnot. But the biggest area of kind of variability was, well, some patients could receive maybe 20 hours of therapy a week, others 25, others 40, and just kind of how things maybe shook out. You could have one BCBA that has 10 patients with 40 hours each a week of therapy, and then another BCBA has 10 patients with 20 hours a week each of therapy. There's big differences in terms of the way in which a BCBA needs to manage their time to provide supervision to those different levels of intensity. And so a change that we instilled was, rather than thinking and talking about what is a BCBA's caseload, it is a number of patients on a caseload, we shifted to it's a number of therapy hours total that a BCBA is supervising. And so now we talk about it as a certain number of hours that a BCBA supervises in a given month, that there's a certain expectation this month. And it's not BCBA supervision. Those aren't the hours that we look at. It's the actual number of therapy hours that a BCBA is ultimately supervising. And so that I mentioned was something that we did, and it's a change that we implemented several years ago. But that's an example of something that I continually talk about. I continually give different examples. I continually reference, whether it be in group context or in individual meetings and discussions with folks as we're looking at their particular caseload. It's something that requires an opportunity to kind of talk about and think through in multiple different ways. And it requires multiple different supports for a BCBA to be successful in not only thinking about the caseload that they manage in a different way, but to actually be successful in achieving those expectations and meeting those results. So supports from, say, our insurance department, who's giving them information on here's the number of hours that you have on your caseload right now, and here's kind of what you actually provided versus what's authorized. So there's just an example of how the BCBAs get information and supports from a department outside of the clinical department. But yes, absolutely. I mean, that's just one example, but I think one that's been a good learning opportunity for me in that, 2018, I think ish is when we made that adjustment. Well, now 4 years later, it's still something that we talk about and have to kind of get used to.
That's why we're friends, Breanne. So literally about 4.5 years ago, when my co-founders at Ascend and I left the large national ABA provider that we were part of and started Ascend, we went from thinking about caseload as not as number of clients, not as number of BCBA billable hours, you point out, but to this number of sort of that pyramid, the number of therapy hours. And I remember talking to some people at the time, and they're like, "Wait, what? Are you crazy?" So I love hearing that you, I mean, not only that you shifted your thinking around that model to better represent the amount of work that has to happen, especially like for a new kiddo, 40 hours a week, and you've got 2 or 3 new RBTs on the case. There's way more time that goes into, hey, that kiddo's been with us for a year or two and, has a couple veteran RBTs, but that you're continually sort of reinforcing that. And that's a really important part of change management, and where back in my career, I failed when I didn't emphasize enough the why and just at like a short amount of time on why and just went directly to the what. So
Yes.
important to be communicating the why to our teams. How do you do that around the why?
Absolutely. The rationale, the why is always built into the decisions that are made or as change or adjustments are coming down through the organization. And the why has always been a really heavy emphasis on the way in which we think and define our BCBA's caseload. And the thing that I really instill within my team members is, again, this notion of you have an expertise that others don't have. You have this knowledge and you have this ability to truly inspire and change the lives positively for the patients on your caseload. And what a disservice it would be if we were to identify that you aren't maximally utilizing your expertise. And if we were to define it by the number of patients you have versus the total number of therapy hours you provide services to, we'd be doing ourselves a disservice because we can't quite see, are you able to utilize and maximize your expertise to the best of your ability? So, kind of taking it from the lens of the BCBA and the expertise that they have, but then also taking it from the lens, the why associated to our mission as an organization. So, we have a mission to inspire, serve, and guide all those touched by autism to achieve a better reality. We can't do that to the best of our ability if our clinicians aren't utilizing their skill set in the very best way possible and really managing things in a way that allows them to reach as many individuals with autism as possible. So, absolutely, the rationale, the why, it has to be a part of change and change management. And if you, as the person instilling the change, is kind of scratching your head, like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Then don't go communicating to your people yet. Figure that out, figure out the why, and then circle back to your group.
You know what? This idea, the concept of highest and best use of one's license and leadership is so critically important. And it's something that I think just in the rest of the medical world, the healthcare world, just it naturally comes easy. People think about it. And a great example is, would you expect a doctor to be drawing blood?
Right.
No, that's why
Yeah.
they're phlebotomists, right? Doctors have to operate at highest and best use of their license and leadership, the
Yeah.
same way that BCBAs and others have to. And I think this sentiment is coming around in our field, and I appreciate champions like you, Breanne, who are helping us understand that and understand that medical model. That feels really important, doesn't it?
It really does. It does. And I love that you drew in an example from a field outside of behavior analysis. I think that's just so important for us to be doing as a field right now is learning from other industries, especially medical fields, patient facing industries like behavior analysis is. And absolutely, we can learn a ton about efficiency, optimizing individual people's talents and expertise areas. So 100% agree with that.
Let's double click on that. And I know something that you and I have talked about in the past is this idea that the ABA field is going to evolve to or more to the quote unquote medical model, right? Because ABA came out of more of the educational model
Mhm.
prior to Medicaid and commercial insurance companies paying for it. So given that we're moving as a field more toward that medical model, like what does that change?
I think it's a lot of what we're finding ourselves talking through with this conversation is as we shift, as behavior analysis shifts more to really kind of adopting a medical model. And medical model, for me anyway, is centered around the fact that the individuals that we provide services to do in fact have a medical diagnosis. We have, some limitations of being able to apply behavior analysis outside of individuals diagnosed with autism. So that could be a whole separate conversation. But when I think about a medical model, I'm thinking about, well, we have an individual diagnosed with autism because of various DSM criteria that they've met. And so now we have, as clinicians, as providers, we have an obligation to evaluate what those symptoms are that are inhibiting their ability to lead maybe as fulfilling of a life as possible. And when I think about the parallels to, okay, well, what can we as behavior analysts learn from the medical field is again this standardization. So we talked about systems development. I think a lot of when you're establishing systems within an organization, it's centered around, well, how can we standardize what we're doing? And when we standardize things, I think that helps to kind of set things apart as far as kind of the differences between maybe an educational model and a medical model. Like in medical practice, okay, here's generally how we're going to respond to maybe these specific deficits, or when we see these specific symptoms, this is generally how we're going to respond. Of course, we'll sprinkle in the individuality, and that's absolutely important as well. But standardization, even in the sense of, okay, well, we have a treatment plan that's helping to demonstrate how we're looking to remediate the symptoms of autism. And so there's medical professionals who have to write essentially a treatment plan, or at least demonstrate why it is that an insurance provider, for example, should reimburse the services that are being provided. And so I think that's warranted for us as behavior analysts to be able to systematically be able to describe why we're providing the services, why we need a certain intensity of the services that we're providing. So dosage is a kind of medical term, thinking about a medical model. Well, dosage is important to us as behavior analysts. We need to be able to determine, why does this patient need X number of hours of therapy per week, and this patient needs Y number of therapy hours per week. We can't just rely on our clinical judgment. There's a lot of gray area in clinical judgment. It's kind of like use clinical judgment with some established standardized tools to then blend and determine what it is that you're doing and how much it is that you're doing.
Mm. You just helped me understand and gave me better language for is I always describe this movement toward a medical model as more a function of like who the payers are. And that's totally wrong. Yes, I mean that's happened de facto, but you couched it in terms of the medical diagnosis of the kiddo. Everything in our field has to come back to the life-changing services and that we're providing for a kiddo. And I think that's really powerful, Breanne. So you've helped me give me a better language to describe that transition. And you use that word that's really important when it comes to systems, which is standardization, which can also be a scary word, I feel like, especially knowing that like all of the treatment we provide is so highly individualized.
Yes.
Um, and yet systems, they incorporate standardization, but that doesn't mean everything is exactly the same. Systems have to be able to adapt and adjust. Same way the human body. I played softball last night, right? And had 5 at bats. My lower back, I'm going to tell you, did not feel like when I took 5 at bats back in my 20s. Like the body systems have to change and adapt.
Yes.
it's possible to have this duality of, yes, standardization exists in systems, and systems have to be flexible and have to be able to adapt to their environment, right?
Right. Yeah. I guess individualized standardization is really what we're aiming for, I suppose.
That's right. There's a term in a wonderful book about the customer experience economy that talks about this idea of like what consumers expect these days is quote unquote mass customization, which I think is the same thing. You got to be able to do both of those. Well, let's come back around to the idea of change. And Jack Welch, who was the longtime CEO of General Electric, and he's got a quote that said something about if the rate of change outside an organization exceeds the rate of change inside the organization, the end is near. Oh, it sounds kind of like gives me the goosebumps still, but
Yeah.
our field has gone through rapid and profound change over the last decade, 2 decades. How do you keep up with that rate of change inside an organization?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really informing team members about the rate of change that our field is experiencing. So I think that oftentimes, or I guess I can at least speak to my experience in particular, is that I have the opportunity to see outside the organization a bit more than my BCBA colleagues. I can be both external facing and internal facing. I have the opportunity to connect with folks like you and other cast members and other professionals in the field and get a sense of kind of what is the changing landscape, what are some of the things that are happening that I need to be aware of and then help influence internally within the organization. Well, oftentimes my colleagues, BCBAs who, for example, maybe hold a caseload of individuals that they're providing services to, they don't maybe have as much of that opportunity to see externally and kind of get a sense of what's happening outside the walls of Little Star, so to speak. So I feel the responsibility and the obligation of like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening out in the world. Here's what we need to be maybe aware of and mindful of. And so certainly that's one thing to help ensure that we can internally within the organization keep up with the rate of change. And then it absolutely is a focus on a culture and a value of continuous quality improvement. So it is
Mhm.
something that was instilled within me in my graduate school experiences. Continuous quality improvement. We can always, always, always work towards
Mhm.
making things better. We're never going to be complacent just with like, I think we're good. I think we're just going to kind of like wash our hands of this. We can step away. There's always going to be opportunities to improve. And so that's a value that I instill within my team members. Like, probably at least weekly, at a minimum, they're hearing me talk about continuous quality improvement. This is amazing what we're doing now, but we can make it better. Like we can tweak here, we can make adjustments. And so I say that as an example of, change. Well, change is improvement if you think about the, synonyms of change, betterment, improvement. And so
Mhm.
that's really just kind of reframing things a little bit and that, yeah, the world is going to change and do things around us. And that's okay because we're ready for it. We're nimble, we're flexible, we're excited about the opportunity to change because that means that we're getting better. So I think it really is just creating that culture, that awareness, that value.
You're so speaking my language. There's so much that we're simpatico on, Brienne, that is like so fun to me. The Japanese have this term kaizen, it literally means change good, but it's
Yeah.
that exactly what you described is continuous quality improvement, right? And the point at which we think, whether as individuals and human beings or as career professionals, um, or as organizational leaders, that we're never going to face more change. We're like deluding ourselves.
Right.
Um, and we can't always control the external environment. What can we control is how we prepare for change and how we build that culture
Yes.
in our organizations. That feels really powerful.
Yeah. 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 And right. Just, it's something that's maybe valuable to you and I, but it can't just stop there. It can't just be valuable to
Mhm.
us. It's really instilling that value in others. And then, using our behavior analytics skill set and then reinforcing behavior that we see that matches with the change that we see or reinforcing flexible behavior and really acknowledging when folks are kind of working outside their comfort zone.
Yeah, great point. Like acknowledge it, like label it, right? Because change is hard.
It
It's
is.
super hard and different people have different levels of tolerance. So just reinforcing it, right? The basics of our science. I love that.
Yes.
That feels like a gift to the field. Breanne, you were recently elected to be a board member of the BACB. So congratulations, like high fives. That is extraordinary. And I know recently you attended your first board meeting.
Mhm.
I don't know the degree to which you could share, like what was it like being at a BACB board meeting? But then really importantly, what's your biggest goal that you hope to achieve during your board tenure?
Mhm. Well, first of all, thank you. I'm absolutely just so incredibly honored. It's just really been a treat to think about being able to serve the field that I love so much in this way. So it's really been amazing. And yes, recently my first board meeting, which was fantastic. The BACB staff are just incredible people. And the board members, some I had already known and had interacted with in my previous professional interactions, and some were brand new to me. And so it's just a really incredibly dedicated, passionate group of people who are just so invested in betterment, I guess, change, improvements for the field. And so, yeah, overall, just has been a wonderful experience thus far. And as far as, kind of things that I would love to see uh, for the BACB or in terms of my role as a board member for the BACB, I first have to give a quick disclaimer is that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. But yeah, really just love the thought of seeing the registered behavior technician credential continue to get more meat behind it. What really is required in terms of becoming a registered behavior technician? How do we, as a credentialing body, help to prepare them for the role that they will have as they start patient facing? And then what are maybe some things that the BACB can do to help influence more longevity in the RBT role? So we're seeing that it's approximately a third of BCBAs will not renew their certification after 1 year. So it's really I think those of us who are practicing and interact with RBTs, I think we know that there's a fair amount of turnover, but to really have an understanding that a third of folks that we're welcoming into the profession today won't be continuing a year from now. I think that's important for us to be aware of and think about what are some things that we can do to help influence that. And I think that the BACB is very aware of what their scope is. It's a credentialing body, a certification body. And so there's a need for kind of partnerships with other maybe organizations in terms of some of the real hands-on kind of practical work and work of practitioners. CASP, again, something you and I are both involved in, does a wonderful job of really kind of taking a hold of those kinds of issues. What are practitioner issues? But overall, whether it be through BACB work, CASP, or any other entity, I think really kind of doing a focus and a double down on the RBT role and kind of what can we
Mm.
do to maybe increase the public awareness of what a registered behavior technician is to further promote folks to find this profession and do the amazing life-changing work that registered behavior technicians do. Those kinds of things I'd love to see happen down the road.
Oh, and I make sure I got this right. So one third of RBTs don't renew their certification after 1 year.
Mhm. Correct.
That's mind blowing.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's mind blowing. I mean, it's mostly mind blowing, just reinforcing what we know around turnover
Right.
at the RBT at our frontline teams level, right? And the impact that has on families, on organizations, and just the field. One third. What that tells me is like there's something that we, and I say we, like me and provider organizations, maybe are also not doing sufficiently to prepare RBTs or behavior technicians to come in to the field and become RBTs. And
Right.
and look, I get it. Like this is I honestly think being an RBT is one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Yes.
And disclosure, like I've never been an RBT. I've seen tons of sessions and I've gone through a chunk of the training.
Yep.
But I mean, is that part of the solution that providers are helping RBTs, number one, understand how freaking hard this work is, and then number two, designing training programs to ensure that they're fully prepared to be successful, in addition to what clearly has to be lots of ongoing support and high quality supervision. I mean, is
Right.
that part of the answer? What's your
I
thought?
think so. I think so. Right. Having more education during the interview and application process around what the role entails, I think is certainly necessary for us right now in the stage of where we are as a field and the kind of length of time that the RBT credential has been in place, which has not been very long, only a handful of years at this point. So people who are applying to a registered behavior technician job are probably pretty unfamiliar with what it truly entails in comparison if they were to apply for a say a retail position. Like I have a general
Mm,
sense of what retail is, or like I've seen lots of people who work at retail places in my life. Like I have models
yeah.
for what that consists of. But have you seen in actuality a registered behavior technician doing the work that they do? Probably not. And so that certainly is something that within Little Star we're taking a look at to determine how can we better educate folks through the application in the interview process. Can we create some videos and whatnot to help them kind of understand? Can we do maybe a lengthier tour of our center so that they can observe and get a feel for what the work will consist of? Because unfortunately, what we're experiencing, and I'd like to imagine that we're not the only ones, is that there's a certain percentage of the folks that we hire who don't make it past a month. I think that is an indication that they just sort of identify, actually, this isn't for me, or this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And so we're actively looking at those things and trying to decrease the number of people who leave within the first month because we can better prepare those applicants and better provide them information on what the role will consist of.
So true. There's this trifecta of awareness of what the role entails, number one. Number two, the great training. And then number three, again, that ongoing coaching, mentorship, supervision, continuing education,
Right.
that BCBAs, for example, might get now. That's powerful. Well, it's interesting. So like if there were a Jim Carr, who's CEO of the BACB, like fanboy club, then I would be the first in line. Jim Carr is he's freaking amazing. When you studied at Western Michigan in, was it 2005, 2009?
Yep.
Jim Carr was there, John Austin, we mentioned Linda LeBlanc. I mean,
Right.
this seems like the pantheon
Yeah.
of like out of behavior analysis. Did you get to study with each one of them? And tell me more about your
Yes,
education and learning.
I did. I did. And again, I was talking earlier about how naive I was in graduate school. And I absolutely had the opportunity to learn from all of these amazingly wonderful people, so prolific. And I honestly, at the time, don't think I valued it as much as I should have. Because now looking back, I actually ran into some of my graduate school cohort members at ABAI this year. And we were basically reflecting on that. Like, oh my gosh, we learned from just these incredible people. And how lucky were we? I mean, right at Western Michigan University in that era, it was just like rock star after rock star. And so just, I now completely cherish that and really value those graduate experiences.
Ah, so amazing. Well, as we look forward in our field, Breanne, like what are some of the top predictions that you have for what's to come?
Well, what's to come? I think we need to be ready for value-based care initiatives. We were talking a bit earlier about the medical model and whatnot. Certainly, our field has shifted in that direction from more of an educational model, and I think we're likely to go deeper and deeper, kind of into that medical model, which will likely
Mm,
include things like value-based care initiatives, which is important and it's good. And we need to, as a field, kind of continually look at how are we evaluating the outcomes that our patients are obtaining and what is the value that the patient gets. Are we doing it in a really proficient way that utilizes our staff and their expertise to the best of our ability? And so, how do we prepare for that as a field? One of the things that I've started to influence within Little Star is establishing key performance indicators for our BCBAs that are fully centered around their patients' outcomes and what are the progress measures that patients within a caseload are making, and ensuring that our BCBAs have an understanding that that is their expectation. I mean, I think it is, without having to say it, certainly people understand, but creating benchmarks around that. We have a performance scorecard system within the organization, and it
Mm,
always evolves over time. And right now, the current evolution and iteration does have a heavy emphasis on, what are you as a BCBA able to do to fully directly influence the progress of your patient. So I think those are some things that we can be doing as a field, not only, very broadly looking at, well, what are patient outcomes? How do we measure that? What does that consist of? All of that is so important,
mm,
but making sure that we get more granular and really influencing our BCBAs to be thinking about what can I do to ensure that my patient is progressing down to, some of the minutia, like what are my clinical decisions that I'm making? How often am I
mm,
making clinical decisions? Am I looking at the rate of progress for my patient as often as I should be? And so those
mm.
are some of the things that we're looking to influence as far as performance expectations.
Yeah, I have always, and if we just look to other parts of healthcare and the medical model, like the road to success in a value-based care world is number one, through clinical quality, full stop.
Hmm. Hmm.
And number two, through strong care coordination, right?
Hmm.
And so like being able to have that data and those KPIs,
Yes.
um, like it feels really important to being successfully on that journey and on that
Right.
road.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So what's one thing, Brianne, that ABA owners should start doing and one thing they should stop doing?
Start doing, I think we touched on this a bit, and that is to look outside of the field of behavior analysis, learn from
Mm,
other more mature fields. And I've just been really interested in this lately because it's something that is important to me, and I'm looking to influence my colleagues and thinking about and valuing that more specifically. Let's look to see kind of historically what, say, the medical field or the psychology field has done, and as I've become more interested in those kinds of things, the medical field has been around since the 1600s, the psychology field per se, late 1800s. Formally, behavior analysis has only been around since 1998. If we think about the BACB's inception, like, sure, we've had the science for several decades, but sort of more formally solidifying behavior analysis as a field, I think, really can be marked with when we had certification to kind of knowledge that there are these
mhm,
people that can do this work. So 1998, that's only 24 years ago. I mean, essentially, behavior analysis can't even rent a car, on their own if we kind of frame it in that way. So, really thinking about, okay, there's hundreds of years of history that we can learn about if we look outside of the field. And so I think, right, we need to start doing that more. There's so much to learn from history and the systems that
mm.
other fields have established. And I think that's important for us.
Well, Brianne, where can people find you online?
You know what? LinkedIn would be the best place. LinkedIn, the Little Star website, littlestaraba.org would be a good place as well.
Awesome. I'll drop both of those in the show notes. So are you ready for the hot take questions?
Let's do it.
All right. So you're on your deathbed, Brianne. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for?
That's such a heavy question, Jonathan. I love that you ask it, and it, really requires some reflection there. I think when it comes down to it, kindness and compassion and establishing really meaningful relationships with people. Gosh, when you strip everything away and think about on my deathbed, what matters the most is connections with other people.
Yes. Oh, as human beings, we're wired to connections and building authentic relationships. Well, what's your most important self-care practice?
Exercise. So I have a morning exercise routine that is so important to me, literally daily. And my husband can tell if I happen to miss a day, maybe I'm not as like in a lighthearted mood. He's like, you need to go exercise. You haven't exercised yet. So yeah, that really grounds me and sets me up to have a really amazing day.
Right on. Do you have a favorite exercise or?
I have a bike, a stationary bike, so I've
Uh-huh.
been doing, like, classes, at-home workouts, and that has been super beneficial, has been my favorite thing. I got it about a year ago, didn't think I would like it, but I'm totally in love, and it's been so much
Wow.
fun.
Oh, nice. That ties back to the idea of building relationships, right? Pushing
Yeah,
one another to our good
yeah.
places. I'm seeing a thread. What's your favorite song?
I'm not much of a favorites person where I say, like, "Oh, this is my favorite food," or "This is my favorite that." So favorite song, not necessarily one that you can, like, jam to per se, but, one that resonates with me and I feel is like a timeless classic is Cats in the Cradle. And
Mm.
so, Cats in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon, and it's something that I remember my dad listening to when I was a kid, and now as a parent, I can resonate with the
Mhm.
lyrics and really just the sentiment associated to embrace every moment of every day. Don't say, "Oh, I'll get to it tomorrow. I'm gonna hang with the kids tomorrow." Let the
Mm.
kids today. They're only little for a short period of time and just fully, yeah, fully live life today.
Yeah, I love Cat Stevens, AKA Yusuf Islam. I had a CD, for those listeners who remember what CDs are, of Cat Stevens and all of his classics that for like 8 years, it was just like a huge part of my life. And Peace Train, his other song, there's just so much I love about the melody, the message in that. So
Yes.
great pick on Cats in the Cradle. Well, if you could give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
It would be, you can do big things. When I was 18, I would say that I sort of thought just like doing big things and achieving big things was for other people. And that it was just sort of like I'm kind of in the background and other folks are sort of like able to do the things. And now I've realized, like, no, I can do big things and I've got important work and I've got important things that can be contributed to the world and to this field that I care so deeply about. And I suppose I just wish that maybe I realized that a little bit sooner in life.
You do have big things you are contributing right now to our field. All right, so you could only wear one style of footwear, what would it be?
It'd be a good old tennis shoe. I was mentioning the daily exercise, good tennis shoes there. I have 4 boys who are constantly on the move and I'm chasing them around to baseball games. And so a good pair of tennis shoes to chase them around is absolutely what I need.
Oh, so practical, so comfortable, so
Yes.
perfect for
Yes.
every day. Breanne, this has been amazing, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you sharing all of your experience and knowledge and intellect and wisdom.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. No, I fully enjoyed the conversation. So appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast. Stay tuned for our next exciting episode. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. We value your feedback. Don't forget to follow us on social media at elementrcm.ai.